In the year 2001, in our quiet apartment in San Diego, a young woman named Mika Yamamoto was cleaning out her grandmother's belongings. The old woman had passed 3 days earlier. Peacefully, the doctor said. In her sleep, at 85 years old, Fumiko Tanaka had simply closed her eyes and drifted away, leaving behind a lifetime of silence and a closet full of secrets. Mika worked slowly through the drawers and shelves, sorting photographs she had never seen, letters written in Japanese she could barely read, and small treasures that meant nothing to her but everything to the woman who had kept them. And then in the deepest corner of the bedroom closet, wrapped in layers of silk and brown paper, like something sacred, she found it. A raincoat. Not just any raincoat. This was a military poncho, the kind American soldiers wore in World War II. The rubber had cracked and peeled over the decades, flaking off in black fragments that looked like dark snow. The fabric beneath was stiff and brittle, barely holding together. And on the back, faded almost beyond recognition, were the letters U.S. Army. Mika held it up to the light. The thing was destroyed. Useless. It smelled of mold and time and something else she could not quite name. Something that might have been tobacco. Something that might have been rain. Why would her grandmother, a Japanese woman who never spoke about the war, keep an American military poncho? For 56 years, Mika did not know the answer. She would not learn it until much later, when she found the letter hidden at the bottom of the box. A letter written in broken English, addressed to a man named Sam and never sent. But that discovery was still hours away. For now, she simply stood in the empty apartment, holding the crumbling remains of a raincoat, and wondered what story it could possibly tell. The story begins not in San Diego and not in 2001. It begins in the summer of 1945 in a place that most Americans have forgotten ever existed. A prisoner of war camp in the heart of Texas. During World War II, the United States held more than 400,000 prisoners of war on American soil. Most of them were German soldiers captured in North Africa and Europe. But there were also thousands of Japanese prisoners, men and women taken from the battlefields of the Pacific. And because Texas had vast open spaces and a climate that discouraged escape, it became home to dozens of these camps. Camp Huntsville sat 70 miles north of Houston, surrounded by flat land that stretched to the horizon in every direction. In summer, the temperature climbed past 100 degrees. The air shimmered with heat. The guards sweated through their uniforms, and the prisoners wondered if they had been sent to some kind of American hell. This is where Fumiko Tanaka arrived in June of 1945. She was 22 years old, a volunteer nurse from the city of Naha in Okinawa. 3 months earlier, she had been hiding in a limestone cave while American bombs fell like rain. 2 months earlier, she had watched her father's house burn from a distance, knowing he was still inside. 1 month earlier, she had been captured by American soldiers and put on a ship bound for a country she had been taught to fear more than death itself. The propaganda had been very clear. Americans were red devils. They had horns and fangs. They raped women and crushed prisoners under tanks. They tortured for sport. They killed for pleasure. Surrender was not an option. Death was preferable. So when Fumiko stepped off the military truck at Camp Huntsville, she was certain she was stepping toward her execution. She looked around at the barbed wire fences, the guard towers, the men with rifles watching from above. Everything confirmed what she had been told. This was a prison. This was enemy territory. This was where she would die. But then she smelled something strange. It was not the smell of death. It was not the smell of burning or decay or fear. It was something else entirely. Something rich and smoky and almost sweet. Meat. Cooking meat. Fumiko did not know it yet, but she was smelling Texas barbecue. And that smell, more than anything else, would be the first crack in everything she believed about America. To understand what happened next, we need to meet the other person in this story. Samuel Hargrove was 24 years old, born and raised in Amarillo, Texas. His father, Harold, had fought in France during the First World War and come home with a wooden leg and nightmares that never stopped. His mother, Martha, taught elementary school and raised Sam to believe that every person deserved to be treated with dignity, no matter where they came from. Sam was an electrician by trade. He loved the logic of wiring, the way everything connected, the satisfaction of fixing something that was broken. He had simple dreams. Marry Dorothy, the girl from the Baptist church. Open his own repair shop. Live a quiet life under the big Texas sky. The war had other plans. Sam was drafted in early 1945, but a shoulder injury during training kept him from the front lines. Instead, he was assigned to guard duty at Camp Huntsville. It was not glamorous work. It was not the heroism that other men would brag about for the rest of their lives. But Sam did not mind. He had seen the men who came back from the Pacific. He had seen their empty eyes and shaking hands. He was in no hurry to earn those wounds. Before Sam left for the camp, his father pulled him aside. "Son," the old man said, his voice rough with memory, "I fought the Germans in France. They shot at me. I shot at them. But when the shooting stopped, I learned something. They were just men. They had mothers too. Don't ever forget that." Sam nodded. He did not fully understand what his father meant. Not yet, but he would. The first time Sam saw Fumiko, she was cowering in a corner of the camp infirmary. It was her third day at the camp. She had been assigned to work in the medical building because of her nursing experience. That morning she was sweeping the floor when the door swung open and sunlight flooded in. Fumiko dropped the broom. She pressed her back against the wall. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped animal. A figure stood in the doorway. Massive, silhouetted against the blinding Texas sun, a rifle hung from his shoulder. His shadow stretched across the floor toward her like a dark hand. This is it, Fumiko thought. The devil has come. The figure stepped inside. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they could crush stone. His eyes were blue. His skin was red from the sun. He looked exactly like the monsters in the propaganda posters. Fumiko stopped breathing. But then the man did something unexpected. He raised both hands, palms open, showing her they were empty. He spoke slowly, his voice low and calm. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." Fumiko did not understand the words, but she understood the gesture. Empty hands, no weapon, no threat. She did not relax, but she did not faint. The man, Sam Hargrove, nodded once and continued about his business. He had come to escort a group of prisoners for their medical checkups. He did his job efficiently and without incident. And when he left, Fumiko was still standing in the corner, breathing hard, watching the door where he had disappeared. That was their first meeting. No sparks, no music, just a man who chose not to terrify a frightened woman. But Fumiko would remember those empty hands for the rest of her life. The first week at Camp Huntsville passed in a blur of fear and confusion for Fumiko. She worked in the infirmary from morning to evening, helping the American doctor named William Chen treat sick prisoners. Dr. Chen was Chinese-American, a man from San Francisco who spoke basic Japanese and served as a bridge between two worlds. He explained the rules to Fumiko. She would be treated according to the Geneva Convention. She would not be beaten. She would not be tortured. She would receive 3 meals a day. Fumiko listened and nodded, but she did not believe him. She had heard too many stories. She had been taught too well. At night, she lay in the barracks with 20 other Japanese women, listening to them cry in their sleep. Some called out names of people who were dead. Some simply sobbed without words. Fumiko did not cry. She had emptied her tears in Okinawa, in the darkness of that cave when she learned her father was gone. She kept a small paper crane in her pocket. She had folded it from an American propaganda leaflet during those dark days in the cave. The leaflet had promised food and safety. She had not believed it then. She was not sure she believed it now, but she kept the crane anyway. In Japan, they said that if you folded 1,000 cranes, your wish would come true. Fumiko did not have paper for 1,000 cranes. She had only this one, and her wish was simple: survive. On the 5th morning, Fumiko went to the mess hall for the first time. She sat down at a long wooden table, eyes fixed on the surface, not daring to look at anyone. A metal tray was placed in front of her. She looked up. On the tray were 2 thick slices of bacon, golden and glistening with fat, 2 fried eggs with yolks still runny, a piece of toast slathered with butter, a glass of fresh milk, a glass of orange juice. Fumiko stared at the food as if it were an alien creature. In Japan, for the past year, she had survived on thin rice porridge and wild roots. Soldiers at the front were starving. Civilians in Tokyo were eating tree bark. Children were dying in the streets from hunger. And here in an enemy prison camp, they were giving her bacon. She looked at the other Japanese women at the table. They wore the same expression of shock and disbelief. An old woman across from Fumiko, perhaps 60 years old with white hair and weathered skin, began to cry. Why, the old woman whispered in Japanese. Why are they feeding us like this? What do they want from us? No one had an answer. Fumiko picked up a piece of bacon. Her hand trembled. She brought it to her lips. The moment it touched her tongue, the world changed. The salt hit first deep and rich and overwhelming. Then came the fat melting across her mouth like warm silk, coating everything in a layer of flavor she had never experienced. There was sweetness underneath, subtle but present, the caramelization of the meat under high heat. And threaded through it all was the smoke. Not the harsh smoke of destruction she knew from the war, but something gentler, something almost fragrant. The smoke of hickory wood in Texas mornings and a land of impossible abundance. The bacon crunched between her teeth and dissolved into 1,000 tiny pleasures. Fumiko closed her eyes. For a moment, just one moment, she forgot about death. She forgot about fear. She forgot about the war that had taken everything from her. There was only the bacon and the impossible fact that her enemies had given it to her. When she opened her eyes, tears were running down her cheeks. She was not crying from sadness. She was crying because she did not understand. She could not understand. The world she thought she knew was cracking apart, and she had no idea what would emerge from the fracture. After breakfast, Fumiko walked back toward the infirmary. Her mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She passed Sam Hargrove standing guard near the medical building. This time she did not look away. She glanced at him just for a second and saw that he was watching her. His expression was curious but not threatening. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle. Fumiko kept walking, but something had shifted. The devil had blue eyes, and the devil had given her bacon. Nothing made sense anymore. Over the following days, Fumiko began to observe the Americans more carefully. She watched the guards and the way they treated the prisoners. There was no beating, no public humiliation, no torture. The guards did their jobs with the bored efficiency of men who wanted to finish their shifts and go home. She watched Dr. Chen in the infirmary and saw how he treated Japanese patients with the same care he gave to American soldiers. The same medicine, the same bandages, the same respect. She watched the mess hall and saw that everyone, prisoner and guard alike, ate the same food. There was no hierarchy of hunger, no starvation as punishment. Slowly, painfully, Fumiko began to question everything she had been taught. If the Americans were devils, why did they feed their prisoners so well? If they were monsters, why did they heal the sick instead of letting them die? If they were beasts without souls, why did that tall guard with the blue eyes raise his empty hands instead of his rifle? She did not have answers, but she was beginning to ask the right questions. One afternoon, Fumiko was working in the infirmary when an old Japanese man was brought in. He was perhaps 70 years old, frail and feverish, coughing blood into a rag. Pneumonia, Dr. Chen said. Serious. They would do what they could. Fumiko knew what that meant. In Okinawa, men like this simply died. There was no medicine, no hope, no point in pretending otherwise. But she did what she had always done. She made him comfortable. She wiped his brow. And then she took a scrap of paper from the medical supply, wrapping, and began to fold. Her fingers moved automatically, creasing and tucking until a small paper crane sat in her palm. She placed it beside the old man's pillow. Suru, she whispered in Japanese. A crane. For healing. For hope. She did not know that Sam Hargrove was standing in the doorway watching. He did not understand the words, but he saw the tenderness in her movements. He saw the way she cared for a dying man who was not her family, not her responsibility, simply another human being who needed comfort. Devils don't do that, Sam thought to himself. Devils don't fold paper birds for the sick. Something shifted in his chest, something he could not name. He turned and walked away, but the image stayed with him. The small Japanese woman with the sad eyes folding hope out of nothing. Late July brought a challenge that neither Sam nor Fumiko could have anticipated. A sandstorm. Texas sandstorms were legendary, and this one was a monster. It rose from the west like a wall of rust hundreds of feet high, blotting out the sun and turning the sky the color of dried blood. The wind screamed. The sand found every crack, every gap, every opening. It filled eyes and noses and throats until breathing became a battle. When the storm hit, Fumiko was alone in the infirmary with 3 bedridden patients. Dr. Chen had returned to the officers' quarters an hour earlier. The other staff had found shelter elsewhere. There was only Fumiko the sick in the howling darkness. She ran from bed to bed, covering the patients' faces with wet cloths so they could breathe. Sand poured through the gaps in the walls and windows. The building groaned under the assault. Fumiko coughed and choked, her eyes burning, but she did not stop. She could not stop. The front door exploded inward. Fumiko spun around, heart seizing, certain that the storm had finally come to kill her. But it was not the storm. It was Sam Hargrove. He stood in the doorway, a cloth wrapped around his face, his entire body coated in red dust. He had no reason to be here. His post was on the other side of the camp. He had a shelter. He was safe, but he had come anyway. The patients, he shouted over the wind. "Are they okay?" Fumiko did not understand the words, but she understood the question. She pointed to the 3 beds, nodded frantically. Sam did not wait for more. He threw himself against the door, forcing it closed, and began shoving furniture against it to hold back the wind. He pointed at the gaps in the walls and made stuffing motions with his hands. Fumiko understood. She grabbed rags and blankets and began filling the cracks. They worked together for 2 hours, no words. There were no words that could cut through the roar of the storm, but they communicated through glances and gestures, through nods and pointed fingers. When Fumiko was thirsty, Sam handed her his canteen. She drank and passed it back. They shared water from the same container, enemy and enemy, as the world tried to bury them in sand. When the storm finally passed, the infirmary was intact. The 3 patients were alive, frightened but breathing. Fumiko looked at Sam. He was covered in dust, his eyes red, his lips cracked. He looked like a statue made of Texas earth. "Thank you," she said. It was one of the only English phrases she knew. Sam looked back at her. She was just as filthy, just as exhausted. But she was smiling. A small smile, barely there, but real. "You're welcome," he said. It was their first real conversation. In the days following the sandstorm, something changed between them. Sam began finding reasons to pass by the infirmary. He told himself it was part of his patrol. He told himself he was just doing his job. But he knew the truth. He wanted to see her. He wanted to understand her. Fumiko noticed. She was not sure what to make of it. The tall American with the blue eyes kept appearing at the edge of her vision, always watching, never threatening. It should have frightened her. It did not. One evening after her shift, Fumiko sat outside the infirmary with a small English dictionary that Dr. Chen had given her. She was trying to learn, struggling through the strange letters and stranger sounds, determined to understand the language of the people who held her prisoner. "Water," she whispered to herself. "Water. Food. Food. Thank you. Thank you." A shadow fell across the page. She looked up. Sam was standing a few feet away, not too close, giving her space. He pointed at a word in her book. His finger landed on the page gently, carefully. "Friend," he said. "That word means friend." Fumiko looked at the word, then at him. "Friend," she repeated, her accent heavy, but her pronunciation clear. Sam nodded. "Good," he said. "That's good." Then he turned and continued his patrol, leaving her alone with the dictionary and a new word she never thought she would need in this place. Friend. That night, as she lay in the barracks, Fumiko thought about the word. Could a guard and a prisoner be friends? Could enemies become something else? Could the devils of propaganda transform into people with blue eyes who taught you words and shared their water? She did not know the answers. But for the first time since arriving in America, she wanted to find out. The days grew longer and hotter as July melted into August. The war continued somewhere far away in places with names Fumiko did not know and outcomes she could not predict. But inside Camp Huntsville, in the strange bubble of barbed wire and barbecue, something quiet was growing. Sam found excuses to help with small tasks near the infirmary. Moving boxes, fixing a faulty light switch. Once he brought a package from home and shared cookies with the medical staff, Dr. Chen translating his clumsy explanations, while Fumiko watched and listened. She learned more English every day. Simple phrases, basic words, enough to understand when Sam told her about Texas. "Big sky," he said, gesturing at the horizon. "Texas has the biggest sky. At night, stars everywhere, like diamonds." Fumiko nodded. "In Naha," she said slowly, "also stars. But here more. Texas sky, very big." Sam smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile. It changed his face completely. He did not look like a devil at all. He looked like a young man who missed his home. "I want to show you," he said, then stopped himself. He knew he could not. She was a prisoner. He was a guard. There were rules. There were walls. There were oceans between them that had nothing to do with water. But he wanted to, and that wanting was something new. Fumiko saw the shift in his expression. She understood. There were things that could not be said, doors that could not be opened, futures that did not exist for people like them. She simply nodded and returned to her work. Some connections are not meant to last, but that does not make them less real. And so the days passed, each one a small brick in a bridge that would never be finished between a woman who had been taught to hate and a man who refused to be hated. Neither of them knew that the world was about to change again. Neither of them knew that in a city called Hiroshima, on the other side of the planet, scientists were loading a weapon that would end one war and begin 100 others. Neither of them knew that the news would arrive in just a few days and that everything would be different after. But for now, in the Texas heat under the big sky full of diamond stars, they had this moment. A guard and a prisoner. A man and a woman. Two people learning that the enemy is not a monster. Just another human being trying to survive. August 6th, 1945. The day the world cracked open. Fumiko was in the infirmary wrapping a bandage around an old man's swollen ankle when Dr. Chen burst through the door. His face was the color of ash. His hands were shaking. He looked like a man who had just witnessed the end of everything. "Hiroshima," he said, his voice cracked on the word. "They dropped a bomb on Hiroshima." Fumiko looked up confused. Bombs had been falling on Japan for months. American planes darkened the skies over Tokyo almost every night. What was one more bomb? "One bomb," Chen said as if reading her thoughts. "Just one. The whole city is gone. Vaporized. They are saying 80,000 people died in seconds. Maybe more." The bandage slipped from Fumiko's fingers. She knew people in Hiroshima. An aunt who had married a merchant there. A friend from nursing school who had moved west to escape the bombing in Okinawa. Hundreds of thousands of ordinary people waking up to an ordinary morning, and then light brighter than the sun, and then nothing. "Not possible," she whispered in Japanese. "One bomb cannot destroy a city." But she looked into Dr. Chen's eyes and saw that he was not lying. He was not exaggerating. He was simply telling her the truth, and the truth was too enormous to comprehend. The news spread through the camp like fire through dry grass. Within an hour, every prisoner knew. They gathered in small groups, whispering, weeping, praying. Some fell to their knees and did not get up. Some stood frozen, staring at nothing, their minds refusing to process what they had heard. Fumiko walked behind the infirmary and vomited. She vomited until there was nothing left inside her. She vomited until she was empty, until she was just a hollow shell, kneeling in the Texas dirt, retching up fear and grief and the shattered remains of everything she thought she understood about the world. The Americans did not just have soldiers and ships and planes. They had the power to erase cities. They had become gods of destruction. And she was in their hands. What would stop them from dropping another bomb? What would stop them from dropping one on this camp, on her, on every Japanese person still breathing? Fumiko stayed behind the infirmary for a long time, her forehead pressed against the rough wooden wall, her body shaking with sobs she could not control. On the other side of the camp, Sam Hargrove heard the news through the radio in the guard station. The announcement crackled through the speaker, the voice of a newscaster barely containing his excitement. A new weapon, an atomic bomb, the equivalent of 20,000 tons of TNT. Hiroshima obliterated. Japan brought to its knees. The other guards erupted in cheers. They slapped each other on the backs, laughed, embraced. The war was ending. They would go home. They would see their families again. Sam did not cheer. He stood up slowly, walked outside, and looked toward the prisoner barracks. Somewhere over there, Fumiko was hearing the same news. Somewhere over there, she was learning that her homeland had just been dealt a wound that might never heal. He thought about her face when she folded paper cranes. He thought about her smile after the sandstorm, small and exhausted, but real. He thought about the way she said thank you, her accent turning the words into something almost musical. She was not a bomb. She was not a statistic. She was a person. And right now, she was probably terrified. Sam reached into his pocket and felt the chocolate bar he had been carrying for weeks. His mother had sent it from Amarillo, tucked into a care package with cookies and letters and the smell of home. He had been saving it, waiting for the right moment to give it to Fumiko. Now he understood what that moment was for. Not a gift of friendship, not a gesture of courtship, something else entirely. Proof. Proof that not all Americans wanted destruction. Proof that kindness could exist alongside the capacity for annihilation. Proof that even in the shadow of the atomic bomb, there were still people who chose mercy over power. He would give her the chocolate tonight. That evening after the sun had set and the camp had grown quiet, Fumiko sat alone on the steps behind the infirmary. She could not sleep. She could not eat. She could only sit and stare at the Texas sky, wondering if Hiroshima's sky had looked the same in the moment before the light came. The stars were brilliant tonight, scattered across the darkness like spilled salt. They did not care about atomic bombs or war or the 80,000 souls who had been turned to shadows on stone walls. They simply burned indifferent and eternal. Fumiko heard footsteps approaching. She did not turn around. She did not have the energy to be afraid anymore. A figure sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. She knew without looking that it was Sam. They sat in silence for a long time. Minutes passed. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. Finally, Sam spoke. Fumiko. It was the first time he had ever said her name. The sound of it in his voice, shaped by his Texas accent, was strange and beautiful. She turned to look at him. In the darkness, his blue eyes were almost black, deep and unreadable. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a chocolate bar. Hershey's, the wrapper said with silver letters that caught the starlight. For you, he said, placing it in her hands. Fumiko stared at the chocolate. Such a small thing, such an ordinary thing. But in this moment, after this day, it felt like the most important object in the world. Why, she asked. Her English was halting, but the question was clear. Hiroshima, your country killed many people. Why you kind... Sam was quiet for a moment. He had been thinking about this all day, trying to find words that would make sense across the gulf between them. I don't know why they dropped the bomb, he said slowly, choosing simple words she might understand. I'm just a soldier. I fix electricity. I don't understand war. He paused, searching for more. But I know one thing. You are not a bomb. You are a person. And a person deserves chocolate. Fumiko looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were wet, but no tears fell. You are a good man, Sam, she said. No. Sam shook his head. I'm just a Texas man. We share what we have. That's all. Fumiko looked down at the chocolate bar. Then carefully she broke it in half and held one piece out to him. Share, she said. Sam looked at the chocolate in her hand. She was offering him half of his own gift. She was turning his gesture into something mutual, something equal. Not charity from captor to captive, but an exchange between two people choosing to be human together. He took the piece. They ate in silence, sitting side by side under the Texas stars, the sweetness dissolving on their tongues. It was not a romantic moment. There was nothing romantic about war or prison camps or atomic bombs, but it was a moment of hope. And hope in August of 1945 was the rarest thing in the world. 3 days later, Nagasaki, another city erased, another 100,000 lives snuffed out in a flash of light. The Japanese prisoners at Camp Huntsville walked through their days like ghosts. They ate without tasting. They worked without seeing. They existed in a state of suspended horror, waiting for the next bomb, the next announcement, the next chapter in a nightmare that seemed to have no end. And then 1 week after Hiroshima, the news came. Japan has surrendered. The war is over. Fumiko heard the announcement through the camp loudspeakers. The English words crackled across the compound, repeated twice to make sure everyone understood. The war is over. She stood in the middle of the infirmary, a roll of bandages clutched in her hands, and felt nothing. Or perhaps she felt everything at once, so much that it all canceled out into a strange flat emptiness. Relief that the dying would stop. Grief for the millions already dead. Shame at her country's defeat. Fear of what would come next. Joy that she might see her mother again. Terror that her mother might already be gone. Around her, the other prisoners reacted in different ways. Some wept. Some cheered. Some simply sat down on the ground and stared at nothing, their minds unable to process the weight of the moment. Fumiko went to find Dr. Chen. Please, she said, her voice trembling. My mother, she is in Kagoshima. Can you find out if she is alive? Chen nodded. He understood. In the chaos of Japan's surrender, millions of families had been torn apart. Millions of people were searching for loved ones, hoping against hope that the people they cared about had survived. I will contact the Red Cross, Chen said. It may take time. Time. Fumiko had nothing but time. She was still a prisoner, still trapped behind barbed wire, still waiting for someone to decide her fate. But for the first time since Okinawa, she allowed herself to hope. 2 weeks passed, the longest 2 weeks of Fumiko's life. She worked in the infirmary. She ate her meals. She watched the Americans celebrate their victory with barbecues and baseball games and laughter. The tension in the camp had evaporated. The guards were looser, friendlier, already thinking about home. The prisoners were quiet or lost in their own thoughts about a future that was suddenly possible again. Sam found more reasons to visit the infirmary. Now that the war was over, the strict rules about fraternization had relaxed. He could talk to Fumiko without worrying about consequences. Their conversations grew longer. Fumiko's English improved daily, fed by Dr. Chen's dictionary and Sam's patient repetition. They talked about Texas, about the big sky and the oil wells, and the way the land stretched flat forever in every direction. They talked about Japan, about Okinawa's beautiful beaches before the war, about Naha's busy streets, about the taste of fresh fish and pickled vegetables and rice that was actually white and pure instead of mixed with weeds. They talked about family. Sam described his mother's apple pie, the way the crust shattered under your fork, the cinnamon smell that filled the whole house. Fumiko told him about her father's stationery shop, the rows of beautiful paper in every color, the brushes and inks that customers would examine for hours before choosing. They did not talk about the future. There was no future for them. She would return to Japan. He would return to Texas. The Pacific Ocean would lie between them like an uncrossable desert. But for now, in these stolen moments, they had each other. Then finally the news came. Dr. Chen called Fumiko into his office. His face gave nothing away. The Red Cross responded, he said. About your mother. Fumiko stopped breathing. She is alive. She is in a refugee camp in Kagoshima. She is waiting for you. Fumiko's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the floor, not from grief, but from the sudden release of a weight she had carried for so long. She had forgotten it was there. Her mother was alive. She was going home. She cried for the first time since Okinawa. Real tears, loud sobs, the kind of weeping that comes from a place too deep for words. Dr. Chen let her cry, standing quietly by the window, giving her the space to feel everything she had been holding back. When she finally stopped, her face swollen and her throat raw, she looked up at him. When she asked, "When can I go?" "Soon," he said. "The camp is closing. All prisoners will be repatriated within the month. 1 month, 30 days, and then Japan. And then goodbye to everything she had found in this strange place. Goodbye to Dr. Chen and the infirmary. Goodbye to Texas and its impossible sky. Goodbye to Sam." The last week of September brought an unexpected event. The camp commander announced a farewell barbecue. Prisoners and guards would eat together one final time, a celebration of the peace that had finally come. It was an unusual gesture, almost unprecedented, but these were unusual times. Fumiko had never been to a real Texas barbecue. She had tasted bacon in the mess hall. She had eaten hamburgers and hot dogs. But nothing had prepared her for what she saw when she walked onto the field behind the main building. A pit had been dug into the earth, long and deep, filled with glowing coals. Above the coals, enormous slabs of meat hung suspended on metal grates, smoke rising from them in lazy curls. The smell was overwhelming. Rich and deep and primal, the smell of fire and fat, and something almost sacred. Sam appeared beside her, holding 2 plates loaded with food. "Brisket," he said, handing her one. "Best in Texas. You have to try." Fumiko looked down at her plate. The meat sat there like a masterpiece, its surface blackened and caramelized, its edges glistening with rendered fat. Beside it were beans in thick brown sauce, coleslaw bright with vinegar, and cornbread still warm from the oven. She did not know where to start. "Hands," Sam said, demonstrating by tearing off a piece of brisket with his fingers. "In Texas, we eat with hands." Fumiko hesitated. In Japan, eating with your hands was considered crude, uncivilized. But she was not in Japan, she was in Texas. And in Texas, the rules were different. She pulled off a piece of meat. The bark came away first, the blackened crust that formed after 12 hours over low heat. It crackled against her fingertips, dry and textured, like the surface of the earth after rain. Beneath the bark, the meat was pink and impossibly tender, so soft it fell apart without resistance. She put it in her mouth. The bark shattered between her teeth, releasing a wave of flavor so intense it was almost violent. Salt and pepper and garlic and something sweet all bound together by the deep pervasive taste of smoke. Then came the meat itself dissolving on her tongue like a dream, the fat rendering instantly into liquid silk that coated every surface of her mouth. The smoke flavor was not harsh or acrid. It was gentle, almost sweet, the taste of mesquite wood and Texas heat and hours of patient, careful cooking. It tasted like the land itself, like dust and sun and wide open spaces. Fumiko closed her eyes. She thought about the rice porridge she had eaten in Okinawa, the roots and weeds she had foraged in the final desperate weeks, the hunger that had become so constant she had stopped noticing it. And now this, a piece of meat so rich and perfect it seemed impossible, given to her by her enemies, shared with her like she was a guest, not a prisoner. Tears rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto the plate. "Good," Sam asked, his voice concerned. "Good," Fumiko said, laughing through her tears. "Very, very good." Sam smiled. "Welcome to Texas." They ate together under the setting sun, the sky turning red and gold and purple above them, the smoke from the barbecue pit rising toward the first evening stars. Around them, other prisoners and guards were doing the same, enemies, sharing food as if the war had never happened. It was not forgiveness. Forgiveness would take decades, generations, maybe forever. But it was a start. 3 days after the barbecue, Sam received his orders. Discharge papers. He was going home. 2 weeks and he would be back in Amarillo, eating his mother's cooking, sleeping in his own bed, returning to the life he had left behind. He should have been overjoyed. He had dreamed of this moment for months. Home, Dorothy, normal life. But when he thought about leaving, all he could see was Fumiko's face. He found her at the infirmary organizing supplies that would be transferred to another facility when the camp closed. "I have news," he said. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. "I am going home." 2 weeks. Fumiko stopped what she was doing. She did not turn around. "Good," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. "You go home. See mother. Eat apple pie." "Yes." Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that could not be said. Fumiko, Sam began. She turned to face him. Her eyes were dry, but something in them made his chest ache. "I know," she said. "You go Texas, I go Japan. We never see again." "I know, I'm sorry." She shook her head. "No more sorry. You say sorry too much. Now I say thank you." "Thank you, Sam, for showing me American is not devil. American is person. Person who share chocolate." She smiled, and it was the saddest smile he had ever seen. "I will remember. Always." Sam wanted to say something more. He wanted to promise to write, to visit, to find her somehow, across the impossible distance. But he knew those would be empty words. The Pacific Ocean was not a barrier you could simply wish away. So he said the only thing that was true. "I will remember you too. Always." The night before Sam's departure, Fumiko could not sleep. She lay in the barracks staring at the ceiling, listening to the breathing of women who would soon scatter across Japan like seeds in the wind. Some would find family, some would find only graves. All of them would carry the memory of this place, this strange interlude between war and peace. Fumiko knew she had to see Sam one more time. She could not let him leave without saying goodbye properly, without giving him something to remember her by. She slipped out of the barracks in the gray hour before dawn. The sky was just beginning to lighten purple, fading to pink at the edges of the horizon. The air was cool, the first hint of autumn cutting through the Texas heat. She went to the place behind the infirmary where they had shared chocolate under the stars. Sam was already there. He stood with his back to her, his pack at his feet, his uniform crisp and pressed. He looked like a stranger. He looked like a soldier again, not the man who had taught her the word for friend. "Sam," she said. He turned, his face shifted through surprise, relief, and something deeper that she could not name. "Fumiko, I was hoping you would come." She walked toward him, stopping a few feet away, close enough to see the details of his face, far enough to be safe. "I want to give you something," she said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small paper crane. It was made from the brown wrapper of the chocolate bar he had given her, carefully folded into a shape that had been passed down through generations of Japanese hands. "Suru," she said. "Crane. In Japan, crane means long life. Good luck. You keep this. Remember Japan? Remember me. Sam took the crane. It weighed almost nothing, just a scrap of paper shaped by her fingers, but it felt precious beyond measure. Fumiko. He started. One more thing, she said. She stepped closer, closer than she had ever been to him, close enough to smell the soap on his skin and the starch in his uniform. She rose onto her toes, and she kissed him. Not on the lips. She pressed her mouth to his cheek just beside the corner of his mouth in the space between friendship and something more. It was a kiss of gratitude, a kiss of respect, a kiss that said everything her limited English could not express. It lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then she stepped back. Sam stood motionless, his hand rising slowly to touch the place where her lips had been. His skin burned with the memory of the contact. "Thank you," Fumiko said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for showing me American heart." "I will find you," Sam said suddenly, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "Somehow, after everything settles, I will find you." Fumiko shook her head gently. "Do not promise what you cannot keep," she said. "Just live good life. Be happy. That is enough." A bugle sounded in the distance. The camp was waking up. Sam's transport would leave within the hour. Goodbye, Sam. Goodbye, Fumiko. He picked up his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked away. He did not look back. He could not. If he looked back, he might not be able to leave. Fumiko stood behind the infirmary and watched him go. His silhouette grew smaller against the rising sun, shrinking until it disappeared into the golden light of a Texas morning. When he was gone, she finally allowed the tears to fall. But she was smiling, because she knew that even though they would never meet again, a part of him would stay with her forever. In the chocolate wrapper crane she had given him, in the poncho he had draped over her shoulders during the sandstorm and never taken back, in the memory of a man who had shown her that enemies were just people, and that kindness was stronger than war. The sun rose fully over Camp Huntsville, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Somewhere a truck engine started. Somewhere men were laughing about going home. Fumiko wiped her eyes, straightened her clothes, and walked back to the infirmary. There was still work to do. There was still a life to live. And somewhere on the other side of the world, her mother was waiting. Time does not wait for anyone. It does not pause for goodbyes or linger over moments of connection. It simply moves forward, indifferent and relentless, carrying everyone along, whether they are ready or not. Samuel Hargrove went home to Texas. He arrived in Amarillo on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 1945. His mother was waiting at the train station, holding a sign she had painted herself, tears already streaming down her face before he even stepped onto the platform. His father stood behind her, leaning on his cane, his weathered face cracked into the widest smile Sam had ever seen. They drove home through streets lined with American flags. The war was over. The boys were coming back. The whole country was drunk on victory and relief and the intoxicating promise of peace. That night, Martha Hargrove made her son's favorite meal: fried chicken with mashed potatoes and gravy, green beans from the garden, cornbread still warm from the oven. And for dessert, apple pie with a lattice crust so perfect it looked like something from a magazine. Sam ate until he thought he would burst. He laughed at his father's jokes. He told carefully edited stories about Camp Huntsville, leaving out the parts that mattered most. He went to bed in his childhood room, surrounded by baseball posters and model airplanes, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. In his wallet, tucked behind his driver's license, a small paper crane made from a chocolate wrapper waited in the darkness. He did not tell anyone about Fumiko. Some stories are too fragile to be spoken aloud. Some memories are too precious to be shared. Sam understood this instinctively. What had happened between him and the Japanese nurse belonged to a different world, a liminal space between war and peace, where the normal rules did not apply. To speak of it here in the bright normalcy of Amarillo would be to diminish it somehow, to reduce it to something that could be explained and understood and filed away. So he kept silent. He married Dorothy the following spring. She was everything he had remembered, kind and patient and devoted. She made excellent biscuits and sang in the church choir and never asked questions about the war. She knew the way wives know things, that her husband carried something inside him that he could not share, and she loved him enough to let him keep it. They had a son in 1950. They named him Thomas after Dorothy's father. He was a good boy, curious and energetic, with his mother's gentle temperament and his father's blue eyes. Sam returned to his trade. He fixed electrical systems and repaired radios and eventually opened his own small business. Hargrove Electric, the sign said, painted in bold letters on the side of his truck. He became known throughout the county as a man who could fix anything, who showed up when he said he would, who charged fair prices and did honest work. Years passed, decades passed. Thomas grew up and went to college and moved to Dallas and started his own family. Dorothy's hair turned gray and then white. The model airplanes in Sam's childhood room were packed away and eventually thrown out. The world changed in ways that would have seemed like science fiction in 1945. Men walked on the moon. Computers became small enough to fit in your pocket. The Soviet Union collapsed. New wars started and ended and started again. Through it all, Sam kept the paper crane. He transferred it from wallet to wallet as the leather wore out and was replaced. He never unfolded it, never examined it too closely, never did anything that might damage the delicate folds. It simply existed, a small constant in a life full of change, a reminder of something that had happened long ago to a person he used to be. He never joined the veterans of foreign wars. He never marched in Memorial Day parades. He never watched war movies or documentaries. When the television showed footage from the Pacific Theater, grainy images of island battles and mushroom clouds, Sam would quietly stand up and walk outside to sit on the back porch. Dorothy noticed. She always noticed. "You okay, honey?" she would ask when he came back inside. "Just needed some air," he would say. And she would nod and return to her knitting, and neither of them would mention it again. Sometimes late at night, Sam would sit on that back porch alone and look up at the Texas stars. They were the same stars that had shone over Camp Huntsville 50 years ago, the same stars under which he had shared chocolate with a frightened Japanese woman who had taught him that enemies were just people wearing different uniforms. He wondered if she ever looked at the stars and thought of him. He wondered if she was still alive. He wondered if she had found happiness. He never tried to find out. The world was too big, the obstacles too many. What would he even say after all these years? How do you reach across half a century and an ocean to someone you knew for only 3 months? The logistics alone were impossible. And beyond the logistics, there was the question of whether reaching out would help or harm. She had built a life. He had built a life. Perhaps the kindest thing was to let the memory remain pure, untouched by the complications of reality. So he never searched for her. He never wrote letters. He never hired detectives or made inquiries. He simply remembered. And that, as she had told him on their last morning together, was enough. On the other side of the Pacific, Fumiko Tanaka was building a life of her own. She returned to Japan in late 1945 on a ship crowded with repatriated prisoners and soldiers and civilians who had been scattered across the Pacific by the winds of war. The voyage took 3 weeks. She spent most of it standing at the rail watching the ocean pass beneath her, thinking about everything she had lost and everything she had found. Her mother was waiting in Kagoshima, thinner and grayer than Fumiko remembered, but alive. They held each other on the dock and wept until neither of them had any tears left. Then they went back to the refugee camp together, to a single small room they shared with 2 other families, and began the long process of rebuilding. Japan in 1945 was a nation in ruins. Cities had been bombed into rubble. The economy had collapsed. Food was scarce, medicine scarcer. People lived in the wreckage of their former lives, scavenging and improvising and simply trying to survive until tomorrow. Fumiko found work as a nurse at a local hospital. It was grim work. Many of her patients were survivors of the atomic bombs, people whose bodies had been damaged in ways that medicine could not fully repair. She changed bandages that covered wounds that would never heal. She held the hands of people who died slowly, their cells corrupted by radiation. She learned to smile even when her heart was breaking, because sometimes a smile was the only comfort she could offer. She did not speak of the camp in Texas. Her mother asked once early on what the Americans had been like. "They treated us well," Fumiko said. "Better than we expected." Her mother nodded and did not ask again. Like Dorothy on the other side of the world, she understood that some experiences could not be translated into words. In 1952, Fumiko married a man named Kenji Yamamoto. He was a former soldier who had lost his right arm in Manchuria. He was quiet and kind and never spoke about the war. They understood each other in the way that only survivors can, communicating through silences as much as through words. They had two children, a boy first, then a girl. They raised them in a small house in Kagoshima, surrounded by the gardens that Fumiko planted and the vegetables that Kenji grew with his one remaining hand. It was a simple life, a good life, the kind of life that had seemed impossible during those dark days in the limestone caves of Okinawa. Fumiko kept the poncho. It stayed in her closet through all the moves and changes wrapped in silk cloth to protect what remained of the deteriorating rubber. The letters on the back had faded to ghosts barely visible, but she knew they were there. U.S. Army, the uniform of her enemy, the skin of the man who had saved her from the cold. Kenji found it once early in their marriage. "What is this?" he asked, holding up the crumbling fabric. "A keepsake," Fumiko said, "from someone who was kind to me during the war." Kenji looked at the faded letters. He understood in his own Pama what the poncho represented. He had seen kindness from unexpected sources during his own war. He had learned that the line between enemy and friend was thinner than propaganda wanted anyone to believe. He put the poncho back in the closet and never mentioned it again. Years became decades. The children grew and left. Kenji's health declined, worn down by the old injuries that had never fully healed. He died in 1973, quietly in the garden he loved, surrounded by the tomatoes and cucumbers he had planted that spring. Fumiko mourned him genuinely. He had been a good husband, a good father, a good man. She had loved him in the way that survivors love each other, with gratitude and respect and the deep comfort of shared understanding. But in her heart, there was another space, a small room that belonged to a different time, a different place, a different kind of connection. The room where she kept the memory of chocolate under the stars and a kiss given at dawn. She never tried to find Sam. The same reasons that held him back held her back as well. The distance, the impossibility, the fear of discovering that the memory was better than any reality could ever be. So she simply remembered, and that as she had told him all those years ago was enough. In 1975, Fumiko moved to California. Her daughter Yuki had married an American businessman and settled in San Diego. With Kenji gone and the children scattered, there was nothing holding Fumiko to Japan anymore. She sold the house, packed her belongings, and crossed the Pacific one final time. San Diego was different from Texas, but it shared the same quality of light, the same sense of endless sky. Fumiko found an apartment near her daughter's home and settled into the quiet routine of old age. She tended a small garden on her balcony. She folded paper cranes by the hundreds, giving them away to neighbors and children, and anyone who seemed to need a small piece of hope. She kept the poncho. It had deteriorated further during the move, the rubber now flaking off in sheets, but she could not bring herself to throw it away. It lived in the back of her closet, wrapped in fresh silk, waiting for something she could not name. Sometimes on clear nights, she would sit on her balcony and look at the stars. They were the same stars that shone over Texas, the same stars that had witnessed a moment of grace between two people who should have been enemies. She wondered if Sam ever thought of her. She wondered if he was still alive. She wondered if he had found the happiness she had wished for him on that final morning. The years continued their relentless march. In 1993, Dorothy Hargrove died of cancer. She went peacefully surrounded by family, her hand in Sam's until the very end. They had been married for 47 years. Sam had loved her faithfully, completely, in the way that good men love good women. Her death left a hole in his life that nothing could fill. He sold the business. He moved into a smaller house. He spent his days gardening and reading and sitting on the back porch watching the Texas sky cycle through its endless variations of blue and gold and red. Thomas visited when he could, bringing grandchildren who called Sam Pop Pop and asked him to tell stories about the old days. Sam told them about fixing radios and building houses and the time a rattlesnake got into the tool shed. He did not tell them about the war. He did not tell them about the camp. He did not tell them about the Japanese nurse who had taught him that kindness was stronger than hatred. Some stories, he had learned, were meant to be carried alone. October of 1998. Sam Hargrove was 77 years old. His heart was weak. The doctors had suggested surgery, but at his age, the risks outweighed the benefits. He had declined treatment and come home to wait for whatever came next. On his last night, he sat on the back porch wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill. The sky was clear. The stars were brilliant. Texas stretched out around him in all directions, flat and endless and eternal. He took out his wallet and removed the paper crane. 53 years. The paper was yellow and brittle, the folds soft with age, the chocolate scent long since faded. But it was still there, still intact, still holding its shape against all odds. Fumiko Sam whispered to the darkness, "I hope you found your sky." He held the crane in his palm and closed his eyes. He thought about the infirmary and the sandstorm and the chocolate bar his mother had sent from Amarillo. He thought about the kiss on his cheek, light as a butterfly's wing burning like a brand. He thought about the woman who had taught him that enemies were just people waiting to be understood. He smiled. When Thomas arrived the next morning, he found his father still sitting in the chair. His eyes were closed. His face was peaceful. And in his hand, clutched gently against his still chest, was a small paper crane made from a chocolate wrapper. Sam Hargrove had died in his sleep, looking at the stars, thinking of a woman on the other side of the world. Fumiko learned nothing of his passing. There was no way for her to know. They had never exchanged addresses, never written letters, never bridged the gap between their separate lives. She continued her routine in San Diego, unaware that the man who had changed her understanding of the world had slipped away on an autumn night in Texas. 2 years later, it was her turn. March of 2000. Fumiko was 85 years old. Her body had grown frail, her lungs weakened by a lifetime of breathing and a recent bout of pneumonia. She was admitted to the hospital on a Tuesday and given a room with a window that looked out over the city. Her granddaughter Mika came to sit with her. 28 years old, American-born, speaking Japanese with an accent that made Fumiko smile. The girl was dear to her, a bridge between the old world and the new. Oba-chan, Mika said softly, holding her grandmother's hand. "Is there anything you want?" Fumiko looked at the window. Outside it was raining. A gentle California rain, nothing like the monsoons of Japan or the storms of Texas. Just a soft gray curtain between the world and the sky. "Mika," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In my apartment, in the closet, there is an old raincoat. Bring it to me." Mika was confused, but she did not argue. She drove to the apartment, found the closet, and discovered the package wrapped in silk at the very back. When she unwrapped it, she gasped. The poncho was destroyed. The rubber had completely disintegrated, leaving only fragments clinging to the fabric beneath. It smelled of age and decay. It looked like something that should have been thrown away decades ago. But on the back, faded almost beyond recognition, she could still make out the letters. U.S. Army. She brought it to the hospital and placed it in her grandmother's hands. Fumiko raised the ruined fabric to her face and breathed deeply. The smells were gone. The tobacco, the rain, the Texas dust. All of it had faded to nothing over the years. But in her mind, she could still catch the faintest trace of what had been. The scent of a man who had given her his skin when she was cold. The scent of mercy in the middle of war. "Who gave you this?" Mika asked. "A friend," Fumiko said. "From a long time ago." "Do you want me to tell him something?" Fumiko closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, she saw the Texas sky at dawn. She saw blue eyes looking at her with something that was not love, but was somehow deeper than love. She felt the weight of a chocolate bar in her hands and the lightness of hope in her heart. "Tell him," she whispered, "the rain has stopped." Mika did not understand. She squeezed her grandmother's hand and waited for an explanation, but none came. Fumiko Tanaka died at 3 in the morning. The poncho still clutched in her fingers, a smile on her lips. She went peacefully, the doctor said, in her sleep, as if she were simply drifting away to meet someone she had been waiting for. 1 year later, Mika stood in her grandmother's empty apartment, sorting through the last of the belongings. She had found the poncho again folded carefully in a box, along with other items her grandmother had treasured. A dried piece of chocolate, hard as a rock, still in its Hershey's wrapper. A worn English dictionary with handwritten notes in the margins. Hundreds of paper cranes in every color imaginable. And at the bottom of the box, a letter. It was written in English, the handwriting careful and deliberate, the words simple but precise. The paper was old, yellowed with age, but never sent. Never even placed in an envelope. Mika sat down on the floor of the empty apartment and began to read. "Dear Sam, I do not know if you are still alive. I do not know if you remember me. But I write anyway. You asked me once why I was kind to you, why I thanked you. I did not know the answer then. Now I know. You showed me that the enemy is not a monster. The enemy is just a person, scared and tired and far from home. The same as me. You gave me chocolate when I was hungry. You gave me your poncho when I was cold. You gave me hope when I had nothing left to believe in. But the most important thing you gave me was proof. Proof that mercy is stronger than war. Proof that kindness can survive even in the darkest times. I kept the poncho for 55 years. I kept it because it reminded me of you. It reminded me of Texas and the big sky and the stars we looked at together. It reminded me that somewhere in the world, there was a man who treated his enemy like a human being. I do not need to find you. I do not need to hear your voice again. I just need to know that somewhere you lived a good life. You fixed electricity and ate apple pie and watched your children grow. You remembered me sometimes when you looked at the stars. That is enough. Thank you, Sam, for showing me the American heart, your friend Fumiko. Mika read the letter 3 times. By the end, tears were streaming down her face, dripping onto the paper that her grandmother had written decades ago and never found the courage to send. Sam. Who was Sam? She did not know. Her grandmother had never spoken of him. The story had died with her, leaving only these fragments behind. A letter, a poncho, a piece of chocolate. But somehow in that empty apartment, surrounded by the remnants of a life she had never fully understood, Mika felt that she had glimpsed something important. A connection that had survived war and distance and time. A love that was not romance, but something purer. 2 people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and had carried that finding with them until the end. She kept everything. The letter, the poncho, the chocolate, the cranes. She packed them carefully into a box and brought them home to her own apartment where they would wait for the day when she was ready to tell the story. Because stories like this deserve to be told. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to survive. Fumiko Tanaka and Samuel Hargrove never saw each other again after that morning in Texas. They lived on opposite sides of the Pacific Ocean in different cultures, speaking different languages, building different lives. They married other people and raised children and grew old in their separate corners of the world, but they carried each other in a paper crane folded from a chocolate wrapper, in a military poncho kept for 56 years, in the memory of a kiss at dawn, brief and chaste, and more meaningful than any words could express. They proved something that war tries very hard to make us forget, that enemies are not monsters, that kindness is not weakness, that a single act of mercy given freely and without expectation can echo across decades and oceans and change the shape of a life. Sam Hargrove was not a hero in the traditional sense. He did not storm beaches or capture enemy positions. He was just an electrician from Texas who chose to see a frightened Japanese woman as a human being. He shared his chocolate. He gave her his raincoat. He treated her with dignity when the world had given him every excuse to do otherwise. Fumiko Tanaka was not a revolutionary. She did not write manifestos or lead protests. She was just a nurse from Okinawa who chose to open her heart to someone she had been taught to hate. She folded him a paper crane. She kissed him on the cheek. She carried his memory as a treasure until her last breath. Small acts, simple choices, nothing that would make the history books. But sometimes the most important things are the ones that no one writes down. The year is 2024. Almost 80 years have passed since a young woman stepped off a truck at Camp Huntsville, certain she was about to die. The world has changed in ways that Fumiko and Sam could never have imagined. Countries that were enemies are now allies. Technology has connected billions of people across every border and ocean. The atomic bombs that ended one war have spawned a global fear that has shaped every conflict since. But some things have not changed. There are still enemies. There are still people we are taught to fear and hate and dehumanize. There are still walls being built, both physical and ideological, to separate us from them. And there is still a choice. We can look at the people on the other side of those walls and see monsters. We can believe the propaganda that tells us they are different, dangerous, less than human. Or we can see them the way Sam saw Fumiko, the way Fumiko learned to see Sam as people, scared and tired and far from home, hoping for kindness, deserving of dignity. The choice is always there, in every interaction, in every moment. The choice to build walls or to share chocolate. The choice to hate or to understand. The choice to be the monster they expect or to be something better. Sam Hargrove made his choice in a prison camp in Texas when he raised his empty hands to show a terrified woman that he meant no harm. Fumiko Tanaka made her choice when she broke a chocolate bar in half and offered part of it back to the man who had given it to her. Small choices, simple acts, but they mattered, they echoed, they lasted. And that is the point. That is the whole point. In San Diego, in a small apartment that once belonged to an old Japanese woman, a box sits in a closet. Inside the box are the fragments of a story that almost no one knows. A ruined poncho, a fossilized chocolate bar, a letter that was never sent, and hundreds upon hundreds of paper cranes folded by hands that understood something that war tries very hard to make us forget. That kindness is stronger than hatred. That mercy outlasts destruction. That the enemy is never really the enemy, just another human being waiting to be seen. The rain has stopped, and somewhere under a sky full of stars that shine equally over Texas and Japan and every other corner of this small blue world, two souls who found each other in the darkness are finally at peace.